commitments that it undertook with this organization by free will, that I would like to remind you is an organization with democratic members, and this implies to fulfill democratic measures. It is nothing more nor less than what we are requesting. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. Now I offer the floor to the Ambassador of Ecuador, Carlos Atiba.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And with your experience, can you request him to speak a little bit louder, please? I can't hear him well. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I was saying that the promotion and protection of human rights presents an element that is essential of the meeting that is defending the government of President Guillermo Castro, especially in the local region. The first mandatory, when he took power, he spoke that the Charter of the Behavior that respects human rights and constitutes an essential and fundamental role of the behavior of the states, and if defense is an international obligation, and therefore all joint efforts that they are required are not violating the intervention right. Respect to human rights annuls all type of behavior and life among the countries. That is why we have the situation that the country of Nicaragua is going through an Inter-American Human Rights Committee, so that the reports to this council on the 12th of May and the principles that have been consecrated in international laws that are applicable and that have been taken with the 4 candidates to the presidency of the Republic, as well as the social and other that are together with complication, with a purpose of avoiding the democratic church, the political of Liberación Nacional, with the approval of reforms that are very extremely important, as well as other conditions, intends to protect and the electoral justice in a process that puts in doubt the legitimacy of the procedure. All of this in contradiction with the resolution that was approved by the General Assembly on the 21st of October that decide on May the deadline for them to avoid and implement the necessary measure to ensure just, fair and coherent elections with the rulings. And that is why we express our serious concern for the problems and the institutionality of Nicaragua, because it goes against of the arbitrary decision about the candidates to the presidency and demands its immediate restrictions, as well as the acceptance of all the limitations that have been imposed to the other parties. The violation of human rights in the Nicaraguan countries and civil society lead us to stress that the only democratic and acceptable situation of the rule of law for social is to have a dialogue among all the parties involved in order to get to a decision. They have to restore the pacific dealment with all the people in Nicaragua. with the Inter-American Democratic Charter that is open to other organizations like the OAS that with its follow-up may contribute to the safety of these procedures, and it urges the Committee of Human Rights to return to Nicaragua and take decisions in order to ensure, I insist, to ensure a change in this situation. As a result, and part of the group that has been working in the situation of Nicaragua, I and was sponsoring also. The text has the right of exercising a democracy. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I want to assure the Ambassador of Nicaragua, who has asked for a right of reply, that he will be accorded that right. And what I propose is that we go through the requests for speakers that we have, and at the end of the list, I will give the floor to the Ambassador of Nicaragua to reply, because I'm sure he may have something to say about each of the presentations that are made. So at the end of everybody's presentation, he will have the floor exclusively. Now I give the floor to the Ambassador of the Republic, the Dominican Republic. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair.
Más Estados miembros.
Just in the same way that all our member countries that have preceded us, we have followed very carefully all the situation in Nicaragua and free opposers, both from the business as other activities in the world, as well as the cancellation of the legal rights of the only opposition party that they had in order to participate in the general elections next November. This constitutes a tangible threat to a democratic process in that brother country. These actions do not stop us to have the necessary conditions to hold free and fair and just elections. And all of us, the countries based on the Inter-American Charter, we have committed ourselves to take any measures. And obviously the Nicaraguan elections foreseen for November are not considered just. We urge the Nicaraguan government to release the people who are being arrested, to ensure their lives and to ensure also the political and other rights of all those who intend to participate in the elections of next November. This was allow of the Nicaraguan people to express themselves freely in the next balloting. We urge the Nicaraguan government to comply with the decisions taken by our foreign affairs ministers in last October and to carry out the elections when basically pursuing all the rights that are established in the Inter-American Democratic Charter. We support all type of assistance in comply with the Inter-American Democratic Charter, as well as the values that we all share that are going to assist our brothers in Nicaragua to find a peaceful solution. We urge and we hope that a system that will restore the belief and lead to a transparent, fair and just election that will express the will of the country and a guarantee for every single actor that is taking into care with the support of all the international organizations. And it expresses that we are going to support all activities of an open and friendly dialogue with all parties in order to reach a consensual and agreed solution that ensures democracy and the respect of the human rights of the Nicaraguan people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now I give the floor to the Ambassador of Costa Rica. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Chair, Secretary General, distinguished ambassadors, delegations present. We are here to look again at the very serious and worrisome situation in Nicaragua. The grave political crisis there is even worse now, given the arrest of Cristiana Chamorro, Arturo Cruz, Juan Sebastián Chamorro, Felix Madrigal, as well as other political and social leaders who are now some of the many political prisoners. This undermines democracy and also the elections in November. And it also undermines the rule of law. Now, 5 months from the new presidential elections, we have come together here to demand that the current administration in Nicaragua immediately releases political prisoners, the pre-candidates to the presidency, and political and social leaders, ensuring their safety, their political rights, their free participation in the political system, and their freedom of expression, also guaranteeing their physical integrity as they have been detained. We must have an end to the harassment and persecution, as well as detentions, searches, mistreatment, and abuses. We demand that Nicaragua respect its international obligations, which it undertook freely, specifically with regard to human rights. The government should make good on its measures, the measures that it has promised to do. And we see that the possibility of having inclusive, free, and fair elections, well, this is fading away. This resolution is a first step to be able to support democratic institutions. We must avoid that there is an implosion of the rule of law institutions and erosion of the independence of the different branches of government. We have a singular opportunity to have measures taken in the framework of a sincere, frank, and committed dialogue, which would allow for a supporting of the rule of law and also paving the way for free, fair, and transparent elections with electoral observers, and to ensure the plurality of the different parties in the elections, as well as respect for human rights and respect for fundamental liberties of all. In the framework of the bicentennial of the liberation of Central American countries, it would be a wonderful way to celebrate it if we could have free, fair, independent, transparent, credible, inclusive elections in Nicaragua with electoral observers. Thank you.
I have next on my list the representative of Paraguay, Raul Martinez. Mr. Martinez, you have the floor.
Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Chair. The delegation of Paraguay supported the convening of this meeting, and we have also co-sponsored the draft resolution that was submitted to this permanent council in keeping with its values. And we cannot remain silent given the violations that have occurred in Nicaragua. We condemn the arbitrary arrest of political leaders in Nicaragua, and we call upon it to comply with its constitution And so we felt it was our responsibility to support and co-sponsor this resolution, given the harassment and arrest of candidates and the repression of the free press. We call upon Nicaragua to take measures so that there can be free, fair, and transparent elections. Currently, we see that Nicaragua is not complying with the measures so that these elections can be considered legitimate. And so we need to reiterate these points in order to ensure elections that respect the Inter-American Charter and the OAS Charter. From the OAS, we must continue to follow up on this situation from this council and also from the General Assembly. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, distinguished representative of Paraguay. Next on my list is the most distinguished ambassador of Chile, Hernan Salinas. Ambassador Salinas, you have the floor, sir.
Chair, since the crisis in April 2018, we have followed very closely the events in Nicaragua, and we see a situation that is a situation where we have we see that the Democratic Charter and its values and the OAS Charter are in jeopardy. And so we are alarmed where we see that democracy is being undermined in Nicaragua. And we see that the situation has been exacerbated because of the adoption of legislation that has led to the arrest of the Nicaraguan opposition. This does not ensure free and fair elections in November. We see that presidential candidates and other opposition leaders have been arbitrarily detained. The situation in Nicaragua means that we need to act. And we not only supported the resolution, but we co-sponsored it. We believe that we need to have cooperation amongst member states. We need to call upon them to respect the values and principles of our organization. And this resolution allows us to work together to ensure democracy and human rights in our sister country, Nicaragua. In this sense, we support the resolution, and we hope that Nicaragua will hear our calls. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Salinas. The next speaker is the representative of Brazil, Gabriel Moreira. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to thank the Chair of the Permanent Council for convening this special meeting. Brazil is satisfied to see the approval of the draft resolution that we considered today. We were one of the co-sponsors of this. With regard to this, we continue to follow the situation in Nicaragua with great worry. We see that the political opposition has been detained, and we hope they will be released quickly. We hope there will be measures taken to ensure free and fair elections. Brazil supports any measures and initiatives that can lead to full respect of democratic principles and values, which are the values of this organization that is enshrined in the Inter-Democratic Charter. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Brazil. And now I give the floor to the representative of the United States of America, Mr. Brad Frieden.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Secretary General. It is indeed unfortunate that we find ourselves here today once again to discuss the situation of Nicaragua. This despite years of good faith offers by the OAS and its member states to help Nicaragua ensure that its electoral framework would allow the Nicaraguan people to choose their leaders through free and fair elections. Not only have these offers been rejected, there's now an ongoing political crackdown in Nicaragua of a kind that should be unthinkable in this hemisphere, given our longstanding and shared commitment to democracy and human rights. The men and women whom the regime has taken prisoner are guilty only of organizing to compete in elections, which Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo fear they cannot win if they are held freely and fairly, as we at the OAS have repeatedly called for. And it's not just politicians from every point on the political spectrum, including nearly all leading presidential candidates, that the Ortega regime is arresting or intimidating. It is also private sector and other civil society leaders. The former president of Nicaragua's Chamber of Commerce, Jose Adan Aguirre, is in jail. Board members and staff members from non-governmental organizations, some of Nicaragua's most respected journalists. These people joined the over 120 political prisoners already languishing in Nicaraguan jails. Many more members of the opposition and independent media are now in hiding or have police stationed outside their homes. Those detained have been denied visitors and denied the right to their own defense. Their families take them food and medicine, but don't know whether their loved ones ever receive it. Some of those jailed have not been seen by their families or anyone else since they were arrested. Some of those jailed are elderly, in poor health, or require daily medications. These alarming facts have been corroborated by international human rights bodies, including the IACHR. The regime controls all centers of power in Nicaragua, including the executive, the legislature, the judiciary, and the Supreme Electoral Council. They have directed these institutions to approve new repressive laws to provide seeming legal cover for the current war on democracy that they are waging. The OAS Permanent Council, along with many Nicaraguan and international experts, have grave concerns that these new laws deny Nicaraguans their basic rights and freedoms. Fellow OAS permanent representatives, colleagues, the people of Nicaragua could be any of us. Nicaragua could be my country or your country. These could be our once democratic institutions, captured by an unscrupulous leader bent on remaining in power at all costs. In fact, many of the countries here today have lived through times like these, whether recently or several decades ago. Dictatorships and authoritarian governments of the left or of the right, unified only by their scorn for the rule of law and their international obligations. These are the times when our voices matter most. The Ortega regime must be held accountable for attacking and undermining democracy and the human rights of those attempting to defend democracy in Nicaragua. The resolution approved today makes clear that Nicaragua's already inadequate electoral environment has deteriorated still further since the OAS General Assembly passed its resolution last October. President Ortega has not heeded our patient calls to establish a level and transparent playing field. Rather, he has doubled down on repression. It is clear to all of us that elections without rights, and now without candidates, are not elections that OAS member states can consider credible, not if we want this organization to be taken seriously. The OAS must act to insist the Ortega regime meet its basic commitments under the Inter-American Democratic Charter. We cannot silently allow Daniel Ortega to consolidate another dictatorship in our hemisphere. we must stand up for democracy and freedom, values that this organization holds dear, before it is too late. Today, in passing this resolution, we have drawn a clear line. Today, the United States again calls on the Nicaraguan government to immediately release presidential candidates Cristina Chamorro, Arturo Cruz, Felix Maradiaga, Juan Sebastian Chamorro, and other civil society and opposition leaders arrested in the current wave of repression. The United States condemns these arrests in the most unequivocal terms and holds President Ortega and Vice President Murillo responsible for their safety and well-being. We repeat our urgent call for the Nicaraguan government to change course and allow the Nicaraguan people to fully exercise their rights, including the right to freely elect their leaders. Mr. Chairman, it is essential that our efforts on this matter not end today. The OAS must engage on this issue. My government looks forward to working with OAS member states, as well as other democratic governments around the world, to address this breakdown in democratic rule. In closing, I would like to send a message to the people of Nicaragua. On behalf of my government, I assure the people of Nicaragua that the United States will continue to fight for your human rights and to press the Ortega regime to meet its commitments under the Inter-American Democratic Charter. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I give the floor to my colleague and brother from Barbados, the Ambassador Newellage. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, the Barbados delegation thanks the delegations of Brazil, Canada, Chile, Costa Rica, Paraguay, Peru, and the United States, and more recently Ecuador, for requesting the convening of this special session of the Permanent Council to discuss this very important issue. As has been reiterated on several occasions in this august chamber, the government of Barbados firmly believes in the principle of non-intervention in the internal affairs of sovereign states. Ours is an unyielding commitment to open dialogue and mediation as preferred avenues to resolve contentious internal conflicts. The government of Barbados strongly advocates that all available mechanisms on the multilateral processes be utilized and exhausted when seeking to achieve effective and sustained resolution to conflict. Mr. Chairman, we simply need to live in a world that seeks to promote a more civilized global economic order, the absence of coercion, that respects a country's right to self-determination, the proposition of fairness, and honors the best attributes of social justice. A world, Mr. Chairman, in which there is a respect for the principle of non-intervention, a principle specifically outlined in the charter of this organization. Having stated that, Mr. President, our delegation takes the floor to add its voice to those countries expressing deep concern regarding recent developments in Nicaragua as obtained from very credible global sources, especially the detention of opposition figures and presidential candidates as the lead up to general elections in that country scheduled for November of this year. As stated before, the government of Barbados passionately believes in the power of multilateralism and the sanctity of consultative engagement with all concerned parties in any conflict. It is therefore extremely lamentable to us that the delegation of Nicaragua has chosen not to participate in preliminary discussions on this matter. It is our contention that all delegations would have greatly benefited from hearing directly from the Nicaraguan authorities on what steps are being taken to effect much needed electoral reform in that country. Please be reminded that these are commitments that the government would have made in the past. This delegation is confident, still confident that the government of Nicaragua remains committed to the defense of democratic principles, a fundamental pillar of this organization. In the same vein, Mr. Chair, my delegation insists that we must be genuine in our efforts to undertake a truly consultative process by ensuring the broadest consultations possible on draft documents at every stage of negotiation, early stages of negotiation coming to this organization. Notwithstanding, Mr. Chairman, the Barbados delegation supports the passing of this resolution as it considers the evolving circumstances in Nicaragua to be sufficiently worrying to warrant a strong call from the OAS membership for adequate steps to be taken to ensure transparent, free, and fair elections in Nicaragua. My delegation emphasizes that its support of this resolution in no way implies a call for the triggering of the Inter-American Democratic Charter against Nicaragua, and in no way demonstrates any weakening of the strong friendship enjoyed between our two countries. The government of Barbados reiterates its firm support for the peoples and the government of Nicaragua. The government of Barbados will continue to closely monitor the situation in that country and looks forward to full engagement with the Nicaraguan authorities on this issue with the aim of achieving a more stable political climate by November of 2021. Mr. President, I'm obliged to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Lynch, for that important statement in all of the aspects that you addressed. And now I would like to give the floor to the Ambassador of Guatemala.
Thank you, Chair. Guatemala thanks you for convening this special meeting, and thanks Brazil, Canada, Chile, Costa Rica, United States, Paraguay, and Peru for sponsoring this resolution called The Situation in Nicaragua. The Charter of the Organization of American States provides in Article 3 that solidarity of the American states and the high purposes that are pursued require the organization to effectively exercise representative democracy. For its parts, Article 1 of the Inter-American Democratic Charter provides that the peoples of the Americas have the right to democracy, and their governments must defend and promote the democracy. In recognition of these commitments and pledges, Guatemala has issued statements in recent days expressing its worry about actions taken in Nicaragua against opposition leaders in that country. These actions undermine free democracy, and we demand their release and the restitution of their political rights. Also, Nicaragua has been reminded that it needs to respect its international obligations, especially with regard to human rights. It is absolutely necessary that it withdraw restrictions that do not allow for the participation of all citizens in its elections, and it must ensure political plurality and freedom of expression. Today, Guatemala has joined with others to support this resolution, voting in favor thereof, taking into account the values enshrined in the Charter of the OAS, the Inter-American Democratic Charter, and the American Declaration on the Rights and Duties of Man, as well as the American Convention on Human Rights, and the democratic spirit of the resolution presented. The delegation of Guatemala, at the same time, would like to state that in compliance with its values, it would like to state what our president has said, President Yamate. A resolution to this problem would not be Nicaragua leaving our organizations. So we would like to state for the record of this special meeting the following text. For Guatemala, this resolution does not lead to the application of Article 21, which would be the suspension of a state to participate in the Organization of American States. Chair, we would also like this to be included as a footnote, and we are sure, or we believe, that Nicaragua will take, or we hope they will take, measures to respect human rights, releasing political prisoners, and allowing for elections in November that are independent, transparent, free, and fair with international observers. Finally, Guatemala reiterates its support and solidarity with the Nicaraguan people. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, the Ambassador of Guatemala. I might just say in passing that nowhere in this resolution was there any reference to the Inter-American Democratic Charter, Articles 20 and 21. That was never part of this resolution that came before me as chair or before this permanent council. And I think I should emphasize that for the benefit of anybody watching this webcast who may have any doubt about that in their minds. Now I would like to offer the floor to Gustavo Tari.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by thanking the Chair of the Permanent Council for his wonderful management of this process, which has led to the approval of this resolution, and also in his deft handling of the conversations that took place yesterday. The interpreter would note that Venezuela has frozen.
Creo que hemos perdido conexión.
I think we've lost the connection with Venezuela, says the technician. Ambassador Tare, can you hear us? The ambassador is frozen.
Yes, he's frozen.
In these circumstances, while we try to get that technical difficulty sorted out, in the interest of time, I'm going to give the floor to the Ambassador of Argentina, who is next on my list. And if Assistant Secretary General, you could let me know when Mr. Gustavo Tare is ready again, I'll give him the floor at that time. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. I'm going to read a joint statement from Mexico and the Republic of Argentina. And I would ask that this be put on the record of this meeting, and we will be providing it to the chair of the Permanent Council so it can be distributed to member states. The Republic of Argentina and Mexico committed to the respect and promotion of human rights as an integral conception in which we include civil, political, and electoral rights, in addition to the inalienable value of economic social rights, want to state their concern about the events that have occurred recently in Nicaragua, especially about the detention of political figures who would be participating in elections. We have witnessed in several countries in the region political persecution, and we condemn this. We don't agree with the countries who have not been supporting democratic institutions and leave aside this notion of non-intervention in internal affairs, which is so important to our history. Now, we are not trying to impose a will from outside or prejudge electoral processes. In this context, we cannot support the resolution that was submitted to the consideration of the Permanent Council of the OAS. The OAS needs to support the constructive concept of its charter, and we appreciate the will to want to negotiate on the part of some member states. We think this needs to be repeated. We want to constructively collaborate, and we are convinced that this situation will be overcome by Nicaraguans themselves. Respecting minorities, the separation of powers, the Constitution, and full respect for human rights. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you very much. And may I give you the assurance that the statement, joint statement between Mexico and Argentina will be distributed to all member states as you requested. Assistant Secretary General, we can assure that will happen.
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. Now, next on my list is...
Excuse me, Chair. We have connected Ambassador of Venezuela back again. It's back online.
Gustavo Tara, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I beg your forgiveness for this interruption, but I have to start again with my words. Thank you, both the Chair of the Permanent Council, for the way it has been carrying out all this process that has taken us to the approval of the resolution that has just been voted. I was saying that from the 4 pillars that sustain the Organization of American States, 2 of them is carried out today in Nicaragua as well as in many other parts of the continent. The sovereignty of the states and non-intervention cannot be a wall against this so that they put the face somewhere else and they do not take into account and the rest of the political rights of all the countries in the continent.
So we would like to say that we are pleased with the clarity of this resolution, which was approved by an overwhelming majority of member states. There is no democracy if any citizens are deprived of their right to run as a candidate, or if political parties are made to dissolve. There's no democracy if there is no freedom of expression or freedom of assembly. There is no democracy. No democracy if people cannot express themselves freely. And we know that this is fundamental so people can express themselves. We must have elections. We have many resolutions about this. We also have many electoral observer missions that go and watch elections. The reality of Nicaragua, ambassadors, is quite different from the reality of Venezuela. The outrages that are denounced are even worse in Venezuela. And the existence of elections that are not fair and violations of human rights need to be denounced wherever they may be found. To conclude, I would like to welcome the approval of this resolution, which enshrines principles that are dear to Venezuela and to democracy. And Chair, Venezuela would also like to co-sponsor this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is the Ambassador of St. Lucia. But just before I ask my brother and friend Anton Edmonds to speak, I just want to make one thing clear. I had given the ambassador of Nicaragua my word that he would have the right to fly to everybody who speaks at this meeting today. And I am going to give the floor after Ambassador Anton Edmond speaks to the Secretary General for him to make remarks. And therefore, I think it appropriate to allow the Ambassador of Nicaragua to speak after the Secretary General has made his remarks, so that he has the right to reply to everyone. That is the way in which I think we conduct our business properly. It's the democratic way, it's the right way. And now, Ambassador Anton Edmonds, I give you the floor.
Chair, very much. Thank you for giving my delegate the opportunity and intervene on this matter. Chair, voted in.
Ambassador, I'm sorry, but your microphone is muting. As muting and muting, yes, it's like, can you refresh your browser? Yeah, I think you have a problem with, yeah.
Well, while we're waiting for Ambassador Edmonds to reconnect, I've got, is he reconnected?
Yes.
Okay. Ambassador Edmonds, you have the floor.
That's all.
Doing it.
I'm sorry, and now you are, okay, go ahead.
Much better now? Okay. And once again, thank you for my delegate.
I'm sorry, Ambassador, but it's back. The problem, I don't know.
I will see.
While it is being sorted out, and I do want to give Ambassador Edmonds the floor, so I would ask that we try to correct that difficulty, whatever it is. It's twinkling like a fairy light, and to give the floor, if I may, now to Washington Abdallah, distinguished ambassador. Sir, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
I think now the microphone is okay. Let's try again.
Is it working?
Yes, it's working.
It seems so. It seems so. Ambassador Edmonds, you once again have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you once again. Thank you for affording my delegation the opportunity. Chair St. Lucia voted in support of this resolution based on our concern about the seemingly inexorable slide away from democracy in Nicaragua. We do so open-eyed and with a firm grasp of the facts, having concluded our own independent analysis of what is happening in that country, as all countries, we assume, have done. Beyond statements and reports noted at the Permanent Council meeting of May 12th, there is ample information available from entities such as the United Nations, the EU, the independent media, and others seized with this issue. We join the call for the immediate and unconditional release of all political actors, be they declared or potential presidential candidates, and urge, plead with the government of Nicaragua to respect human rights of these and others, including civil society persons that are now being summarily rounded up. Chair, on May 12th, my delegation noted in our intervention our concern of laws recently developed that could be seen as efforts to subvert freedoms of expression and sideline political opposition. Just over a month later, these laws are being used to do just that. My delegation is reminded of the obligation that we all have under the Charter and the Democratic Charter of the OAS. We believe that the peoples of member states of the OAS have a right to democracy, and that our governments have an obligation to promote and defend it. We also believe in non-intervention, but to be clear, this does not mean that we will sit by, see threats to democracy, and be quiet. Non-intervention does not mean that we will sit by and see human rights abuses meted out on people without speaking up. Arbitrary arrests, jailings, and the killings of those interested in peaceful protest and exercising their franchise deserve our condemnation. Each and every member government of this organization will hear from our delegation when breaches in democratic norms and human rights abuses make it to a permanent council or General Assembly meeting of this organization. We are pleased to be amongst the 28 who voted for this resolution. Chair, in closing, we believe that speaking up and acting on resolutions brought by member states is the best way to restate our collective ownership of the OAS, to wrest it away from any who posit their opinion in the public, but do so alone and not with our endorsement. We hope that the government of Nicaragua hears our collective plea that it returns to the path of democracy. Inasmuch as we wish you to remain within, as a productive member of the organization, adherence to democratic norms and the protection of human rights remain the key to your membership, as it is to that of all of us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Edmonds. Very important statement. And now I give the floor to the Ambassador of Uruguay. Sir, you have the floor.
Could you please request the floor, Ambassador? Yes, we are connected. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I confess. Can you hear me? I confess. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I confess that the mood with which I came to this meeting has been changing. And probably this is the best thing that can happen to me and to all of us, is to find a large environment of conviction, of firmness, of willingness regarding a path that we understand at the level of the international community must happen. It is no less important, Mr. Chair, that 26 countries, 5 abstentions, and 1 vote against. That is telling us something very clearly, something very relevant. You are going to tell me, yes, majorities are majorities, but there are some majorities that are more important than others, that have a stronger voice. And you also have the positions like the one we have just felt, that from a position but probably doesn't coincide with the majority, nevertheless demands deep felt changes in Nicaragua. And that is why, Mr. Chair, Cristiana Chamorro is not on holidays. Arturo Ruiz, neither he nor Madariaga. They have been stopped from having their freedom. And, you know, as a condition of pre-candidate or potential candidates, perhaps. And I said with precision, you know, I have not found somebody else that would qualify it so clearly. This is a complete madness, what Ortega is doing. Human dry watch, you know. Nobody. It is something very important what I'm saying. A few days ago, during an interview with Carmen Aristegui, you know, this enormous, well-known journalist, Carmen was reminding me that many people from the Sandinist group had already also been stopped from their freedom or enjoying their freedom. And, you know, the previous Hugo Torres, very clearly determined important people from. So the regime is coming to an area of radical extremist despotism. I don't know what word you want to find. Anyone applies. And in other opportunities, one says autocracy. Well, you know, is the use of strength per se, violent strength, and coming from a electoral path, and the fact that people may decide freely their destiny. Look, I come from a country that a man who is there behind me taught us that we had to be free men and respect each other and build our destiny. Well, he taught us the concept of tolerance, respect, respecting the life of the others. This is the core thing. Everything that we said today has a component that as an international community, we want a change in the destiny of Nicaragua. I want that. But more than anything else, I want the life of all these people to be respected, that are placed to a situation that is completely unacceptable and very improbable that it may end well. This is the last train that Mr. Ortega has, I don't know, quite frankly, Mr. Ortega has shown us that he is willing to do whatever, and like Chamorro said a few days ago that I thought was spectacular, to remove them. Ortega is in the state of war, but state of war against the civil population, against the politicians that want to change his attitude. Quite frankly, we had never seen a repression of this part, a repression that would reach these levels that are almost unbelievable. And never had we seen what we see now with our brothers. Because you can say, or some already said it, the interventionism, we are far away from pretending that no, what we want is that as an international community, as an international organization, the democratic charter, the human rights, respect by the norm that Nicaragua itself signed at the time. This is the topic. The question is, how do we go on from now onwards? Well, perhaps raising our voices. They sometimes look to the right or to the left, and when they see nobody, because there's nobody around them from Ortega, they start feeling concerned. I said that many times. You go with them with complacency, with ideological positions of so-called friends. That is a mistake. Neither right nor left in this case. The only thing that matters is to have Nicaragua exactly to see what it is living, and that is terrible. And as it is terrible, we have to reject it. We have to point it out with our finger, and clearly and firmly. Ortega must know that the international community is not going to stop. Europe has it very clearly understood already. All our continent knows it clearly. Well, yes, I'm finishing, Mr. Chair. Just 1 second more. Those who are on the side of democracy and what are on the other side, and the other side is always wrong. We are on the side of the good. That is what I wanted to say, Mr. Chair.
And I'm mindful that you kept within the limit of time. So I thank you for that too. And now I'd like to offer this floor to the Secretary General, Luis Almagro. Secretary General, sir, you have the floor.
Thank you for the way you hold this meeting. Saludo la resolución del Consejo Permanente.
I welcome the resolution that has been presented and approved during this meeting because it is an advance. I salute all the countries that have participated in the debate today. This resolution reminds us that we must recover democracy and the respect to humanity in this region, and that the repressive and violent actions to silence the press and opposition have become the daily fact, and places us once again ante the reality of having to recognize that without free, transparent and just elections with good observers and international observers, Nicaragua will not be able to recover the democracy nor to place again the country in a good footing. We started a work with the country in 2016, and in 2017 we signed the agreements that allowed us to go on and see after several years of municipal elections. The observers in 2015 are the basis of the electoral proposal and change that is being asked for. Therefore, the agreements allowed us to set the basis for a better thing of what is necessary to be reviewed so that the country may have elections that are free, just and fair. But since April 2019, the observers were present as a witness and following all the dialogue resulted essential jointly with the Red Cross so that the General Secretariat could advance in the agreement of releasing more than 300 prisoners. It was also the General Secretariat that dealt with the agreements that left the human rights in 2019 and that created of Messene that allow us to have a better knowledge of the conditions of human rights in the country. And the General Secretariat also gave access so that many other international instances could come to the country and exchange discussions and dialogue, only to recall a context that will allow us to confirm that the American states are also developing an articulating position with other organizations and institutions and gave elements that are essential to analyze the situation in the country, but they were extremely important for the hundreds and many more prisoners, for their families, and all the people whose prison was avoid human suffering. And recalling all these facts, it is inevitable to mention that we cannot leave aside that from a certain moment and after the initial commitment, the government of Nicaragua has broken up with all the agreements with the General Secretariat, with the American states, reiterated with all the constructive dialogue that had been kept in October 16, February 17, that was not putting into practice all the conditions that were presented to the organization and the agreement reached between the government of Nicaragua in 2019. We must also recall that the government of Nicaragua requested the presence of the document that was signed in 2009, March 19. Many opportunities, and in many of the opportunities I have presented institutional reports on the condition in the country. We have heard, listened and read reports of the messianics, of the High Commissioners of Human Rights of the United Nations and many other organizations. All institutions have agreed, and we have agreed also with those reports. Unfortunately, the conditions in Nicaragua have deteriorated, and we have known, and we are discussing today. That is why I repeat the conclusions that are fully aligned with the resolution adopted to date. And if we free the totality of the people that pre-candidate political businessmen, all who have arbitrarily imprisoned, and to return the civil rights to them. It is absolutely necessary to respect human rights, to free the political prisoners and the restitutions that are applicable, and the full restitution of the political civil rights of all Nicaraguans and all the inter-American international instruments, CDH, MISEN, the High Commissioners of Human Rights. And today, this adds that it is extremely important for all these politicals and to defend the citizenship in Nicaragua. If we wait for them to comply with the follow-up of the observers that will follow the elections like it had been determined in the last report, as well as is established in the resolution approved today. The situation is extremely concerning. We do not have the necessary democratic tools to be able to ensure this and a free and full election. as well as the submission of all the other powers of the state. It urges to release the prisoners as well as all the pre-candidates. Chamorro, San Juan Chamorro, Naguerri, Paley, Arturo Cruz, Félix Madariaga, Vargo Fretes. All those that were captured, Tamara Davide Rivas, and their colleagues, their own colleagues of some other times, Hugo Torres, Sim Baradona, Victor Hugo Tinoco, Ana Margarida Vigil, Marco Fretes. Quite frankly, by three pictures that I have here in my office, Carlo Gutierro, Marco Conteri, and others. People who gave their life for the freedom of Nicaragua. I hope that they may recover, and I hope that the black and red colors of Sandinism may represent in future democracy. Today, unfortunately, is the image that has been cruelly hurt and that hurts throughout the whole continent. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Secretary General Almagro. Now, I promised the distinguished representative of Nicaragua the right of reply, and sir, I give you the floor to do precisely that. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. After this interventionist exercise of the organization, we're going to exercise our right of reply, seeking to summarize the untrue opinions expressed by some delegations. First of all, we want to refer to the points raised by the United States that attributes itself the right to talk about peace and rights when really they are destabilizing the entire world. They're violating human rights in many continents, and they are dismantling their own institutions. They persecute human rights activists, and so we demand that the U.S. stop persecuting peaceful protesters who entered into the Capitol and release political prisoners so they can exercise their rights to freedom of expression and stop this witch hunt. That they stop the violations that are ongoing at the naval base in Guantanamo, the violations of international law, the embargo on Venezuela and Cuba and Nicaragua as well. These are inadmissible, they are inhumane, and we believe they are crimes against humanity. They have a long resume of violations, and so it's not credible that they can give any kind of lessons on human rights. We cannot be a sovereign nation if we believe that the United States is allowed to impose conflicts on us, impose sanctions, to try to revive a new coup d'etat in our state. We will not allow them to do this, and I hope they understand this clearly. We are going to continue to defend our sovereignty, our right to decide on our own affairs, our own self-determination, and we also want to send a message to the U.S. people, the Americans. The Nicaraguan peoples love peace. We are friends of the United States. Many Americans who have goodwill, who are generous and altruistic, we know that. And so we have ties of friendship between our nations. We also wanted to refer to the statements of Canada, a country which, like the United States, has been contaminated by European imperialism. A country which is characterized by a system of corruption, in its administration, persecution of its minorities like indigenous peoples, and we have forced disappearance of women and children who are indigenous. This continues to be a concern of human rights bodies at an international level. And so we believe they need to correct these actions and act in a framework of autonomy as a nation so that they can be credible. Now, with regard to Costa Rica, we are concerned. According to UN reports, that as a result of the pandemic of COVID-19,
what we have before us is a resolution. You asked for the right to reply to countries which have spoken about the resolution. You are now embarked upon an examination of other countries which are not a matter for discussion at this Permanent Council. You, of course, are free to bring a resolution or a declaration to the Permanent Council regarding the human rights violations that you see in any of these countries. But right now, what we are trying to do is to hear from you, sir, your responses to the genuine concerns that have been expressed by member states about the situation in Nicaragua. We would like to hear from you, sir, about your responses to that, not to be attacking other countries, but to concentrate on what we as a Permanent Council set out to do today, which is to hold out a hand of friendship to you. We've put up a quite reasonable resolution, which offers a hand of friendship to Nicaragua. If you don't mind, sir, I would prefer if you would keep to that subject rather than to embark upon a litany of attacks on other countries, which are not relevant to today's proceedings. So I beg you, sir, please can we stay on the agenda and the item we are discussing? Thank you.
thank you, Chair. I regret to not agree with you. Nicaragua, according to you, can be subject to attacks from all delegations that have intervened, but we have no right to defend ourselves. That is unacceptable, and we will not admit that. We have the right to exercise our right to reply, and we can talk about whatever we want. We are a sovereign nation. You cannot impose on us what we have to say here at this organization.
I'm not trying to impose on you, Ambassador, and now I will give you the floor to speak freely. I was offering a word of advice. You can reject it as you like. And I give you the floor. You may speak completely freely.
Thank you, Chair. Well, we keep talking about freedom of expression, but that's why I was concerned about the point you raised. So, Costa Rica, we are worried about xenophobia and also hate speech against immigrants, and that was stated by the United Nations. Only 13% of indigenous peoples actually go to school, and only another percentage are allowed to go to secondary school. The UN commissioner expressed her concern about indigenous rights activists who are being attacked in Costa Rica, and that there is prolonged violence against them, and actions have not been taken. Costa Rica has also attacked indigenous people, and Bibi Serja Rojas was murdered. She worked to defend indigenous rights. There have been other attacks against human rights activists. These crimes have gone unpunished. There has been no rendering of accounts. in this regard, and the UN continues to investigate these aggressions, deaths, and harassment, and we demand Costa Rica comply with its international obligations. Now, the Dominican Republic. The Dominican Republic continues to show xenophobia against Haitians. And in May of some years ago, we had a change in the law which led to Haitians being left in legal limbo. And so these bureaucratic processes that don't work, these changes in the law, have left all these people stateless. Many people who were supposedly Dominican when they were born were stripped of their nationality in keeping with a judgment of the Supreme Court. Many of these people are not allowed to actually get any kind of papers, and there is a threat over their head that they will be expelled. There have been thousands of people who were detained recently because they have not been following the curfew. We have violence against women and children between January and December. Dozens of women were killed, 70 of which were femicides, according to the UN Human Rights Commissioner. In Chile, there are hundreds of political prisoners in Chilean jails. This is due to the repression against protesters. There have been protests against the unequal treatment that people have received. Many of these protesters are still in jail, and we had excessive violence on the part of law enforcement. People who are protesting have been criminalized by the state. There have been laws used against them. In Peru, the police impunity under the last administration has been a serious problem, and the Peruvian state has been characterized as one that represses its people and uses excessive force against protesters, as well as the military. According to Amnesty International, the security laws in force should be reformed. There is a report from 2020 which shows that the inequalities with regard to health or right to health have been exacerbated by COVID-19. There's a lack of financing. There's a lack of protective equipment. Peru has one of the highest mortality rates from COVID in the world. Now, to not go on and on in this regard, in Paraguay, we denounce police brutality against children, the existence of mistreatment and torture in their response to COVID-19, supposedly to further national security. Indigenous people are discriminated against, as well as indigenous children. With regard to Uruguay, and to conclude, Chair, the crisis caused by COVID exacerbated existing inequalities and especially hit marginalized people hard. The response to COVID-19 had negative consequences for economic and social rights of minorities. From April to date, more than 100,000 people fell into poverty, which was a marked increase. The media reported that in August, the food banks were being emptied out by these minorities. In July, a law was passed which had provisions which were very imprecise and restricted freedom of assembly and freedom of expression, which the ambassador of Uruguay was boasting about. Now, there's been a prohibition of demonstrations. This is very concerning, and we are very concerned about these new laws that were passed, which allows for pretrial detention. According to the prosecutor's office, in November of this year, we have 927 people who were detained and are awaiting trial. And the rate of incarceration is very high in Uruguay, one of the highest in the region. Now, we still have people who were disappeared during the dictatorship in Uruguay, whose whereabouts are still unknown, and I could go on and on. Now, I heard the statement made by the Uruguayan ambassador, and I would demand that the Uruguayan ambassador be more respectful of our president, Commander Daniel Ortega Saavedra. Ambassador, I would have you know that he is the greatest leader we have ever had in our history, and he carries on with the Sandino principles and values. Yes, it's true. We are at war against poverty, against injustice, against repression, against attacks by the U.S. government, which wants to destabilize the legitimate and fairly elected government in Nicaragua. And we will continue with this war until we find peace without any interference by foreign powers. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, the Ambassador of Nicaragua, to whom I think we have given a full and respectful hearing. Now, I have a request from Mr. Michael Tatham of the British Embassy. And just for the benefit of people who are not aware of this, Britain is an observer mission to the Organization of American States, as is the European Union, Spain, France, Italy, and each of them have a right to speak at these meetings if they so request. That is the reason why Mr. Michael Tatham is being given the floor at his request at this meeting. Mr. Tatham, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Sanders. Thank you, Secretary General, Assistant Secretary General, members of the Permanent Council, fellow observers, for this opportunity to speak. The United Kingdom welcomes the opportunity to share its concern at the latest developments in Nicaragua. The ongoing steps being taken by President Daniel Ortega, his wife, Vice President Rosario Murillo, and their regime to deprive the people of Nicaragua of the right to choose freely their own political leaders and parliamentary representatives are unacceptable. 3 years ago, in 2018, the Nicaraguan authorities were responsible for serious and deliberate human rights violations in response to popular protests. More than 300 people were killed, 2,000 people were injured, and at least 1,600 citizens were arbitrarily deprived of their liberty. This campaign of oppression and this stifling of voices raising concerns has continued. In the past year, the Ortega regime has introduced legislation that the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has said undermines the rights to freedom of expression, association, and peaceful assembly. The Ortega regime is using this and other legislation to systematically weaken the country's democratic institutions and processes. Its deployment of the national police and pro-government mobs to harass politicians, human rights defenders, journalists, and NGOs is intended to, and is, repressing civil society activity and disenfranchising opposition leaders and their parties. The Nicaraguan government has repeatedly violated international human rights standards and fallen foul of its own country's constitution. It is deliberately falling short of and failing to meet its responsibility and duty to protect and uphold the rights and freedoms of the Nicaraguan people. So the United Kingdom shares the real concerns of all those who have spoken today at the unacceptable and arbitrary detention in Nicaragua of more than a dozen opposition politicians, activists, and members of the independent media this month alone. The arrests are unwarranted and undermine democracy. They are an affront to the values and principles of the OAS and the wider international community. They are in breach of the international commitments made by Nicaragua, including of rights enshrined in the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, to which Nicaragua has been a party for more than 40 years, and under the Inter-American Democratic Charter. The United Kingdom condemns these arrests unequivocally and calls on the Nicaraguan authorities to stop all such arrests and to release all political prisoners immediately and without condition. The United Kingdom, alongside its partners in the Americas and beyond, has repeatedly supported calls on Nicaragua to take all steps necessary to address the deteriorating human rights and democracy situation in the country. The United Kingdom government once again calls on the government in Nicaragua to take action and support all steps necessary to ensure that democracy in Nicaragua functions as it should. We call on the authorities to support and uphold the rights of all Nicaraguan voters to exercise their right to vote freely, safely, and without interference in this year's elections. We look to the Nicaraguan government to do all that is necessary to ensure that all political parties, their chosen candidates, and their supporters are able to campaign freely and safely in advance of the elections. We call on the government to allow journalists, the media, and civil society groups to operate without restriction. We urge the government of Nicaragua to implement without delay new legislation and an electoral framework consistent with international standards, and to promote free and fair elections in November. We echo the call for the Nicaraguan government to invite OAS and other credible international observers to monitor the election in November. The United Kingdom firmly endorses the resolution text that has been put to the Permanent Council for approval. As a committed observer of this distinguished organisation, we are encouraged that so many member states have taken this opportunity to send a clear message to the Nicaraguan authorities. By passing the resolution, the countries of the region stand together, united in their concern, in their condemnation, and in their call for the government in Nicaragua to work with them and take action to address these concerns and reverse current negative trends. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tatham. The Ambassador of Nicaragua has asked for the floor. He does have the right to reply. Ambassador, please feel free.
Thank you, Chair. I thought that the round of interventionist countries had concluded, but we have an observer country supporting this resolution, which is not allowed. They are an observer nation. We are not allowed to support resolutions in the European Union. They should not be interfering in our internal affairs. And they want to come and give us democratic lessons in a country that has maintained colonies for decades. If they want to give us any lessons, they should give the Malvinas back to Argentina. They should stop the repression against Black Lives Matters in London. We saw brutal violence on the part of the police. They should stop this. You cannot give us lessons in democracy when you are violating people's rights. The United Kingdom should stop exporting, for example, tear gas and rubber bullets that are used to repress people who are involved in demonstrators. You should do this in light of what's been going on. For example, in the United States, you have an anti-terrorist law that imposes sentences on people who are accused of terrorism. And you use this law against people. And so Nicaragua is doing the same thing. We have anti-terrorist laws and we are applying them. What's the difference? In the UK, and we're talking about the resolution, Chair, we have in the UK the elimination of protections with regard to people's rights who are accused of terrorism. Basically, there's witch hunts going on in the UK. Now, as far as freedom of expression is concerned, we saw what happened with Julian Assange. Supposedly, they protect the freedom of expression of all journalists, but really, they just are pushing the Washington consensus, the U.S. values. Julian Assange continues to be jailed because of his work at WikiLeaks. The United States has been asked to withdraw charges against him because of violations of his rights. Now, I don't want to go on much more about this, but we would like to request that the British ambassador take care of his own affairs before he comes and tries to scold us. Nicaragua wants to live in dignity and democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador of Nicaragua. Now, I have no more requests for the floor. If I may, in concluding this meeting, say the following. First, only member states of the Organization of American States voted on this resolution today. No other country did. No observer and no extraneous country from the OAS did. Only member states. Second point I'd like to make is that this resolution did not come before this Permanent Council lightly. It was a difficult process because the circumstances are difficult. But I think both Ambassador Edmonds of St. Lucia and Ambassador Lynch of Barbados reflected the positions that I think we all agree with, which is that we are not for intervention and interference in member states of this organization, but we are for upholding human rights and the rule of law and democracy. And none of us can stand by. We're in any country of the OAS, and there are still a few that need attention. Let me put that on the record too, for violations that are taking place. And we need to address those as well. Finally, I'd say this: Nicaragua is a full and valid member of this organization. The people of Nicaragua are valued members of the Society of the Americas. The right of the Nicaraguan government to speak in this organization has always been respected, and it was respected today. The member states of the OAS in the past have offered Nicaragua the hand of support in all efforts to maintain democracy and to uphold the rule of law. The hands of all member states continue to be held out to Nicaragua. And should that hand be accepted, Nicaragua will not find the member states of the Organization of American States rejecting that hand. I think we have concluded today's business of this special meeting on Nicaragua and the resolution before us, which has been adopted. Today's proceedings will be recorded in the minutes of the meeting. I thank you all for your participation. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you.